Secretary. Yeah, I think they're one of the I'm not helpful on that.
Otherwise,
Keep meeting that high standard. How are you? How's everything? Thank you. I know I've got time to do that.
Yeah, that's
Well, hello, everyone. The House Elections Committee will come to order. Would the clerk please read in the letter from Speaker Tate?
Dear Mr. Clerk, I appoint the following members of the 102nd Legislature to the Standing Committee on Elections for the 2023-2024 legislative legislative session. Chair Representative Cerniglu, Majority Vice Chair Representative Wagella, Representatives Burns, Colzar, Hope, Churches, Minority Vice Chair Markkinen, and Smith. Sincerely, Joe Tate, Speaker of the House, 10th District.
Thank you. Would the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Cerniglu,
Here.
Representatives Wagella. Here. Hope.
Here.
Colzar.
Here.
Burns.
Here.
Churches.
Present.
Markkinen.
Here.
Smith.
Present.
Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Markkinen moves to adopt Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. in room 327 of the House Office Building as the normal day, time, and location for meetings of the House Elections Committee. Will the clerk please take the vote?
Chair Cerniglu.
Yes.
Representatives Wagella.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Colzar.
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
Churches.
Yes.
Markkinen.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 8 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 pass. That is adopted.
Thank you. The House Elections Committee will follow Chapter 4 stated in the House Standing Rules that were adopted on the House floor. For today's agenda, we will have testimony from the Department of State and State Attorney General's Office on the following: the implementation of Proposal 22-2. Here to present from the Department of State is Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson.
Madam Chair, thank you for inviting us to share an update on Michigan's elections. As you mentioned, the Attorney General and I, given the dual responsibilities of our office, particularly when it comes to protecting our elections, are glad to be here today to share with you both and answer questions about our work over the last several years and also the work ahead and the path ahead. We're here today really grateful for the partnership that I hope we can all build together in the years ahead, and recognizing that partnerships were key to enabling us in historic moments throughout our democracy over the last several cycles to ensure we were ready to meet that moment and deliver fair, efficient, secure, and accessible elections for every citizen in our state. But yet, as you know, we've been doing that work in many ways under and enduring challenges that are a part of what we have come to see as a multi-year, multifaceted, nationally coordinated attack on our democracy. That said, the citizens of Michigan on both sides of the aisle and from all around our state have worked with us to meet this moment and ensure that participation has continued to increase and the security of our elections remain intact. But that said, we've got a lot of work we can do together in the years ahead to continue to ensure our democracy is one in which every voice is heard and every vote is counted, and in which citizens, regardless of where they come from or who they may vote for, can have rightly placed faith in our elections, which we're all dedicated to ensuring we build upon and make happen in the years ahead. So today I'm going to talk about two things that we feel we can all do together to ensure that our elections continue to be secure and fair, and providing additional information on some of the policies needed to strengthen and protect the system even more. A lot of factors go into making our elections secure and fair, notably from the security side. And I'll also preface this by saying that, the AG and I stand here today, as well as our teams, to be a resource to all of you in this committee, because you no doubt will see a number of proposals come before you in the years ahead, and we and our teams want to be there to help you work through how these proposals would play out on the ground in a real-time understanding. And I know even today you may be faced with opportunities and proposals. What we've seen and what I've seen, both as someone who's been working in election law and administration for the better part of 2 decades from multiple vantage points, is that policies that sound good oftentimes need a lot of work to ensure that they play out in the way that's intended for policymakers. And we stand here also to ensure that you enter into votes and decisions and policy development with a firm understanding of how things would actually play out and manifest themselves to voters and the citizens that we all serve. So, in that, noting the decentralization of our system enables protection of security and security checks and layers throughout the system that we've implemented oftentimes prevent, detect fraud. And the AG, I know, will speak to her office's commitment to ensuring where fraud exists in any step of the process. We want to have all tools at our disposal to ensure that it's addressed, that there are consequences, and that we deter bad actors from even attempting fraud to begin with. We also work with our bipartisan clerks. As you know, we have over 1,500 cities and towns all across the state, 83 county clerks, all work together to protect the security of the process and ensure its integrity, alongside bipartisan boards of canvassers that certify results and the transparency throughout the system. And we welcome your input on how to continue to increase that transparency, because important to me is ensuring that we work to address ahead of time misinformation or potential attempts to mislead citizens about the security of our system. And we recognize the importance of transparency and proactivity in doing that. From an accuracy standpoint, there are many layers in the process as well to ensure our elections produce accurate results that reflect the will of the people. From tabulator accuracy, which is confirmed before, during, and after elections, to post-election audits that both identify best practices to ensure continuous improvement and affirm the results of our elections. We've got a lot of pieces to the puzzle already in place to ensure accurate outcomes, and including what can often lead to results of elections coming, in our case, within 24 hours after the polls are closed, but still reflecting the fact that we prioritize accuracy and security in tabulating votes over speed when reporting results. Similarly, from an accessibility standpoint, our elections have only seen an increase in turnout over the last several cycles, which we're really proud of, including record-setting turnout in 2020 and in 2022. That is a reflection of a lot of the changes that have taken place and the investment in the work we have brought to the table to ensure citizens everywhere know how to exercise their right to vote, how to get their ballot, how to return it on time, whether they do so through the mail system, early, in person at their clerk's office with an absentee ballot, or at the polls. So today, the AG and I will particularly be talking about election misinformation and the challenges that creates for our system, but also how we can work together to protect our system against it. And we really want you to see, or I really want you to see, the continuation of what happens when voters are inundated with lies and false conspiracy theories that seek to undermine what the facts should enable, which is a well-placed faith in the election system and their outcomes. But at the same time, that misinformation prompts threats and harassment of election officials that have a real impact on our elections in every community for all citizens. And this oftentimes leads to violence, which many of you have both endured and seen firsthand over the service, those of you who served last term in particular. So we stand with you in wanting simply just to ensure that citizens have access to facts and truth about our elections, that our clerks are equipped with protections so that anyone who, perhaps in furtherance of coordinated misinformation, is trying to harass or dox or in other ways make our system and the people within it feel less safe, that we're working together to protect them and protect the people who protect democracy. So as some of you know, I announced, or I think as all of you know, I announced and requested legislation a few weeks ago to explicitly ban and penalize threats, harassment, and doxing of election officials and workers. We know that 1 in 3 election officials is concerned about their safety. 1 in 6 have been threatened based on research that a number of think tanks have put out. By putting our election workers in danger, it puts our democracy in danger. And without stronger laws, misinformation will continue to inundate voters with lies and false conspiracies about our elections that leads to threats against those in the system. We'd like to see laws that require, current law allows charging as misdemeanors with penalties up to $1,000 a year of fines or a year in prison. We'd like to basically make it a felony to threaten or harass election officials and double the penalties for doing so, at least, or increase them up to 5 years in prison and fines that that reflect the gravity of what they're doing, not just to the person they're threatening, but to voters and to our democracy. And I'll just say, and there's been a lot made about the attacks that I and my family have endured over the last few years. And what we know personally, and what I've experienced personally, is that these attacks are not aimed at me. They're aimed at our democracy. They're aimed at our elections, and they're aimed at voters. And they're protest over the voice of the voters. And so our laws have to reflect, and the consequences that come from those attacks have to reflect the gravity and the impact that the attacks have, not just on the individuals they're aimed at, but on the system as a whole, which is also part of that. So that's why we're recognizing that that in particular, we need to speak clearly, unequivocally, and I hope from a bipartisan perspective, that threats and harassment and doxing of election officials has no place in our state, has no place in our democracy, and has a clear impact on the individuals that are being threatened, as well as the voters and the democracy that they represent. So if we can really work to ensure that we strengthen our laws to make clear there are consequences when you threaten the people who protect democracy, it's possibly one of the best things you can do as committee members to speak clearly and unequivocally that there's no place in our democracy for threats against the people of our democracy. We also have to recognize the connection. This isn't just threats that come out of nowhere, people who are upset, even if an election didn't go their way. These are individuals who are making threats mobilized by falsehoods and misinformation and the belief that somehow something has gone wrong in order to generate election results that they disagree with, when in reality the facts simply show that the will of the people stands. And so recognizing that there are, and I know the AG can speak to this as well based on her work and investigations, there has been intentional, knowingly sharing false information about elections or people's right to vote that have generated this threatening environment, this harassing environment that our election officials are working in. And so we ask for your help in explicitly prohibiting the intentional spreading of false information about elections or a person's right to vote. We recognize that sometimes people spread misinformation about candidates in a democracy. That's different than spreading misinformation about the structure of elections and the people who work within them. And that's what we're asking for your help in making clear is inappropriate and and that there's no place for that in our democracy. And then finally recognizing I'll talk a little bit about this later, the importance of fully funding our elections to ensure that our election workers and our voters are fully secure. So that's one. The second part of my presentation to you today is to give an overview of the major changes made to our Constitution by the passage of the amendments that voters made to our Constitution by the passage of Proposals 1 and 2 in this recent election. I'm going to specifically focus on the amendments to our Constitution enacted by voters through what is known as Proposal 2, and they include really 4 provisions and a few others that require other changes, which we can talk about, but I want to speak today really to the 4 provisions that require other legal and logistical changes for you to consider. And so the first of those is the creation of a permanent absentee voter list. The second is the 9 days of early in-person voting all throughout our state. The third is prepaid return postage that the state will cover for absent voter applications and ballots. And the fourth is the secure absent voter ballot drop boxes all throughout our state. For the first, the absent voter mail ballot list, we have to ensure that there's a single application to be mailed by the state and be mailed to ensure everyone is mailed an absent voter ballot for all future elections. The permanent mail ballot list gives all voters the right to create just one single application and be mailed an absent voter ballot for all future elections. So the creation of a system that will ensure even that the permanent mail ballot status moves with voters when voters update their registration list also requires additional technology. And we also want to ensure voters are able to be taken off the list upon request, upon the cancellation of their registration, or if an election official gets reliable information that a voter has moved. But notably, this list requires ballots be mailed for all elections, including local elections. The other part of implementing this requires us to ensure our qualified voter file is able to collect and track that permanent status on that list, and also overlap with other absent voter status consideration for voters who, for example, are serving overseas. And so a number of things and a number of policies need to be developed to ensure that we're implementing that, including training our clerks and additional education and outreach. The second piece of that, which we know there's been a lot of coverage, is now that all voters get the right to at least 9 days of early in-person voting. This is polling place style voting, where voters actually are able to put ballots through a tabulator, as opposed to what we have now, which is in-person absentee voting, where a voter simply returns their ballot and it's set aside for later processing. What this means is staffing requirements and other protections, just as if it were a polling place on election day, are now required for clerks' offices all across the state. And notably, ballots are tabulated, but tabulator reports are not run, so results are not generated as you go along. Results are not generated until election night itself, when the polls close. We also recommend that municipalities within a county share early voting sites hosted by the municipality or county to ensure costs are covered, and that helps to defray costs and also ensure staff is able to be shared across jurisdictions. Early in-person voting will also require programming of voting equipment and other types of tools to ensure that clerks have the ability to prepare and provide this early in-person voting for every citizen in their jurisdiction. And I think the bottom line is as I'll speak to later, is just to keep in mind as you develop policies around this, is funding and flexibility to ensure clerks at the local level have sufficient funding to meet these requirements, to staff these early voting locations, to rent the space that is needed for the early voting locations, and also that they have flexibility, because what a rural clerk in the Upper Peninsula may need is very different from what the city of Detroit may need in terms of resources, space, and support. I'll also emphasize the importance of public education and outreach that you uniquely can help make happen and fund and provide resources for. What we saw in implementing the proposals in 2020 that were passed in 2018 was that we can build that strong infrastructure to implement these proposals as required under law, but unless we can actually tell voters about them, then everything we do could really, especially in the light of misinformation that flows into our system, could really fall on deaf ears. So thinking about ways in which we can work together to educate the public about these changes and early voting as an option is key going through the next 2 years. Finally, or third, all voters have a right to state-funded prepaid return postage on absent voter ballots and applications, and then we will also be creating a state-funded system that tracks submitted absent voter applications and ballots, including electronic notifications. So all of that is going to mean that we set up a new system within our office that builds on our existing tracking system, but enables that tracking to occur. The prepaid postage and ballot tracking will require design changes to applications and ballot envelopes that we will work to develop, as well as changes needed to the qualified voter file to facilitate tracking information. So all of that is underway, but will take many months to develop. And lastly, the absent voter ballot drop boxes. All voters have right now to state-funded absent voter ballot drop boxes, and each municipality must have at least one drop box, and one for every 15,000 registered voters for all elections. Now, fortunately, we already have some drop boxes that clerks have placed throughout the state, but working to make sure we are helping every clerk meet these new requirements will be a part of our work moving forward. In addition to that, we estimate up to 2,000 drop boxes may be needed, and we will work to comply with statutory requirements for drop boxes to ensure that we're meeting all security obligations, but we ask you to recognize that that may require financial and logistical challenges for us as well. So legislation that we now need moving forward on these four provisions really falls into 3 areas. One, implementation of Proposal 2. And this will require election officials to have statutory guidance on the details of implementing different parts of the proposal, such as how clerks should retain and store ballots from multiple precincts when the same voting machine is used, and how postmarked ballots that arrive after Election Day will be processed, and given some of the changes that enable those to be counted. The second tier is aligning current laws with constitutional amendments to ensure, with the new constitutional amendments to ensure, for example, that early voting, which requires early tabulation but not reporting of ballots, so absentee ballots should be, we recommend, also tabulated during the same time as well as early voting tabulation to ensure consistent and smooth tabulation, and that there's not a confusion over whether someone's ballot is tabulated or not. But we also now know that early voting would, in allowing early tabulation but not reporting of ballots, would protect the security of that reporting through Election Day. We also want to ensure that while automatic voter registration is required by our Constitution, we want to ensure all young citizens have the opportunity to be automatically registered by the age of 18, and there are aspects of our law that we need to change to enable that pre-registration when citizens get their driver's licenses. And then finally, we want to ensure that all military service members deployed overseas are able to return their ballots electronically, including spouses and dependents. The third tier is putting clerks in a position to succeed under all these new election policies. And a lot of that also gets back to funding, but certainly standardizing election dates and providing more flexibility for location of polling places and early voting locations will be important to do to ensure that clerks have the flexibility to implement and meet these new requirements. The last thing I'll just say is the bottom line of all of this is the importance of fully funding our elections. We hope that you'll work with clerks and with our team to provide predictable, sustainable, and efficient funding of our elections, and ensure that we can work with you to do a cost breakdown of jurisdictions and statewide needs, and get as granular as you need. But for example, we already know that clerks will need funds to enable those 9 days of early voting, and include, which would include at least 3 staff for 72 hours plus equipment and rental space. And then what we anticipate that looking like is about $100 million. We already estimate that we need about $100 million annually, which is about $20,000 per precinct, for clerks to administer elections in this new moment with all that is needed. With these new constitutional amendments, we estimate there's an additional $30 to $50 million needed annually, including about $20 to $30 million for local jurisdictions and $20 million for the state BOE, the Bureau of Elections, to cover the postage, the implementation of secure drop boxes, and other technology upgrades. So we welcome the opportunity to work with you on that cost breakdown, but I think the bottom line is, when we're talking about election policies that are needed to make real the amendments that voters put in our Constitution in 22, while also protecting our election officials, funding, resources, and support and flexibility for our clerks to make decisions that are best for their community, need to be the, I think, driving force behind all legislation. So with that, I'll turn it over to the Attorney General, who also has some comments on the challenges she's faced with regards to seeking consequences for those who threaten our elections and election officials.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So I didn't know you were going to bring up PowerPoint. Anyway, it's really an honor and a privilege to be here with you all today, and this is such an important committee that you all are serving on. I'd like to, to echo and support the sentiments of Secretary Benson on the importance of ensuring that we have safety and security for voters and for elections. Just to go over a few things that our department has had to do in the last few elections that was not, I think, traditionally done by the Department of Attorney General, but it's sort of a reflection of how times have changed. So, for instance, for the 2022 election, before the election, our office took many steps to protect voters and election workers. We had special agents from our office meet weekly for months with the FBI, the Michigan State Police, local law enforcement agencies, and the Michigan Department of State. Then on Election Day, the Department of Attorney General's special agents set up a command post in Lansing as well as in Detroit, where there were FBI, Department of Attorney General special agents, MDOS, and analysts there on hand to answer the election tip line that was set up by our office. And EG agents responded to many, many calls and complaints relaying information back in real time. Then after the election for this year, I should say the last year, our special agents were asked now on a number of occasions to escort members of the Board of Canvassers along with the Bureau of Election members to and from certification votes. That had never happened before. It was never necessary before. And agents from the Department of Attorney General provided protection now on 4 occasions, each time putting together an operations plan with House and Senate sergeants at arms and Michigan State Police. I truly believe that the 2022 election in Michigan went so well that it should really serve as a model for other states, but that accomplishment was in significant part attributable to the efforts of my department, the Secretary's department, and our efforts to disseminate information to poll workers through numerous MDOS-sponsored online training sessions or through the local clerks. And so this knowledge gave poll workers the confidence that they needed to make those difficult decisions sometimes when it came to people who were violating the law. My department also, it should be noted, provided advice to local law enforcement partners all around the state of Michigan. And we actually supplied this past election and the election before it, a very comprehensive memorandum where we try to spell out each and every law that we believed that law enforcement officials would need to know about, and then we also set forth a number of hypotheticals so that they could be best prepared to tackle any issues that came before them. But while we think that this last election went very well and was a model for success, we know that there is still more that we have to do because of all the ongoing threats. And so some of the things that our department is going to be advocating for is to update statutes to ensure that voters and election workers are free from harassment, threats, intimidation, and that especially includes those who bring firearms to polling places or around counting boards or drop boxes, and stiffening the penalties for threats to election workers, and not just election workers, by the way, also county and state boards of canvasser. This system doesn't work without them. We need good people to serve in those positions, and we're not going to have good people serving in those positions if they are subject to threats against themselves or threats against their family members. It's absolutely unacceptable. What we've seen at the Department of Attorney General through our investigations and prosecutions is that, honestly, the current election laws are simply not sufficient to meet the gravity of the moment and the newly imagined ways that our elections can be undermined. And so, for instance, an effort to circumvent the votes of 5.5 million Michigan voters or massive petition signature fraud such that 5 gubernatorial candidates were kept from appearing on the ballot, those types of activities should not be treated the same way as forging a $200 check at the grocery store. I think we all recognize that those are different things and they shouldn't be treated the same. We also need better, more significant laws directed specifically, again, at protecting voters and protecting the sanctity of our elections. And this also includes imposing campaign finance laws and lobbyist regulations to ensure public transparency. And the public at large And voters, in particular, deserve to know who is contributing to a candidate or a ballot proposal and how that money is being spent. So I look forward to working closely with all of you to ensure that law enforcement has the tools that we need to properly protect voters in our elections and to protect democracy as a whole. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much to both of you, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. I know we look forward to working with you closely and working on all of those priorities that you've talked about today. Now is a time that we can take questions from committee members for Secretary Benson and Attorney General Nessel. And I believe Representative Kolazar has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here. My question is for Secretary Benson. It may have been in the PowerPoint. I don't think I missed it. But with the new, with the changes with Prop 2, do you still see any type of need for pre-processing, which I know we spoke a lot about last term?
Thanks for that. Yeah, on that note, as I mentioned, we have to think about it as you now have two systems for people returning their ballots before the election. One, they return it and it's tabulated because it's early voting. And the second, they return it and drop it off and it's set aside because it's an absentee vote. For those ballots that are set aside, we've now under current law have basically two different systems for treating these early ballots. And the easiest thing administratively, because we already are going to have a secure system for processing and tabulating votes as they come in, those 9 days before the election, is to align the tabulation and processing of the absentee ballots that are returned beginning at night, that are returned prior to an election, to ensure that they're able to be processed and tabulated at the same time that the early votes coming in are being processed and tabulated. So from a purely sort of smooth, efficient, secure, administrative, clear standpoint, the law needs to be updated to allow for 9 days of processing and tabulation of absentee votes to align with the early voting process. Otherwise, you have these two systems which clerks have to administer, keeping some ballots set aside because they can't be processed and tabulated until Election Day, while tabulating and processing those designated early votes. And it's confusing. So it's confusing for clerks. It creates the possibility of problems that is really unnecessary by simply aligning the process. And in addition to that, it's confusing for voters, because under the current system, voters are going to have to choose whether they want their ballot to be tabulated or set aside for tabulation on Election Day, and that creates confusion for voters as to why their ballot should be treated any differently based on the category in which they choose to return it. So the bottom line is, and states all across the country, I'm sure, could emulate this, that we need a law updating the processing and allowing for the processing and tabulation of absentee ballots to align with the processing and tabulation of early vote ballots. Mm-hmm.
We also have a question from Representative Markinen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both for being here today. How long do you anticipate the AV ballot tracking system to be implemented? And do you feel it'll be ready for the 24 election?
Yes. That is our plan. The funding will determine the efficiency of that, because it takes people and technology to do it. We have a system already in place, and there are vendors already ready to go. It just and we have a track record of getting things up as quickly as possible, and then we have to educate clerks and voters about it. But our full intention and plan would be to have it in place by the first election in 2024, whenever that may be.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Representative Smith.
Thank you, Chair. And this question is for Secretary Benson. I've heard about the presidential 2024 primaries possibly doing back-to-back. What are your thoughts about that?
I have well, first of all, the clerks have spoken. I think they've sent a letter to you all that really outlines the administrative impossibility of having two elections back to back. I believe that our job as election administrators is to work to build the system that you as lawmakers want. And so our question is also, okay, if you want these two elections back to back, how would that work? And the bottom line is you'd be funding two elections back to back, which could cost upwards of, we estimate $500 million total for both elections. because you're not just running 2 elections. You're running 2 elections back to back at a time when the post-election work for the first one would run up against and overlap with the pre-election work and the election work for the second, creating a need to hire entirely new staff, purchase voting machines for both elections, and educate voters about, when they hear election day, which election day they would be participating in. And that leads me to the second concern, which is even if we had a magic wand to enable us to fully fund the machines that would need to be purchased, the people that would need to be hired, and all of the stress that would create on the system itself, you still have the question of educating voters about 2 statewide elections back to back and the understanding that they can't vote in both, which I assume the law would also make clear. But we want to avoid a scenario in which a voter hears election day and shows up to vote in both. And then we have the problem of a system. And again, when you get to the issue of post-election needs, which oftentimes are, updating the poll book with pre-election needs, which require a poll book fully updated, you open up a possibility where things may overlap so that a voter could potentially vote in both elections and not be stopped the second time because things haven't been fully updated to reflect their vote from the first. And it creates a lot of problems like that none of us, I think, want to create for our voters, and a lot of concerns for our election administrators. I think the clerk's letter and their communication will speak for itself as well, and I simply just stand with them in recognizing, though, again, I see our role as, like, you tell us the election system and we'll work to build it, but know that it is nearly impossible for us to have 2 elections back to back like that without significant administrative hurdles, problems, not to mention the challenges voters would encounter in trying to understand their vote and when and how to cast it.
Thank you.
Representative Burns?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both for being here with us today. So, Secretary, my question is for you, and it has to do with kind of the public outreach and education component that you've mentioned. Are there best practices that you've seen from other states that have perhaps implemented similar expansions in terms of voter access, specifically where populations such as college students, who are really a fundamental part of our democracy but can sometimes be difficult to reach, and populations such as maybe new immigrant populations, new citizens, new voters. What does that look like, and what can you share with us to that end?
I always say democracy is a team sport, and this really, underscores that principle. Partnerships make voter education real. We could do, and clerks could do, and we do, whether it's educating people about the security of the system, the security of the tabulation process, how to get your ballot and return it on time. We can put out the content all day, but if that content isn't reaching people, particularly in marginalized communities or low information communities, then it doesn't have the intended impact. And our job is to make sure that every voter in the state, whether they live in, the most rural parts of the Upper Peninsula or the most urban parts of Detroit and Pontiac, have access to the same amount of information and fully understand how to exercise their right and their vote. So all that said is partnerships are key. Partnerships with academic institutions. That's why you've seen precincts on campus that academic institutions have opened up. Perhaps drop boxes on campuses will be considered as well. We also have a task force of college students that help us and advise us on how to prepare. But even so, that still hasn't been fully sufficient at avoiding what we saw in November, which was long lines on at least 2 college campuses from students showing up at the last minute to register and vote. So we need to do more to work collaboratively and meet people where they are to ensure, especially with all of these changes that are really a great thing for enfranchising voters, that people know exactly how to get access to that information. We've established within my department 2 working groups, one of election officials and stakeholders to help advise us on policy, and I know the chairs of both the House and Senate election committees are a part of that. We also have a task force on countering misinformation and educating voters that will empower faith leaders, business leaders, college campus leaders with information and content that they can then deliver to the communities they touch. But a lot of what we'll be doing over these next 18 months and 2 years to prepare for the 2024 election cycle will not just be building the system to meet the needs of the laws, but also educating voters about them. And that's, again, where our work is eased. All these partnerships that we build, all the education that we need to provide to clerks, our work is eased when we're fully funded. And right now, we have staff at our Bureau of Elections who are working 3, 4, 5 jobs at once because they are charged with both evaluating signature petitions and educating clerks and ensuring our campaign finance system works. So that's why I can't say enough that the best thing you all can do to help make our elections more secure is ensure that we're working together to have the funds that we need to meet the moment. And you have, I know us, and I imagine I speak with many, speak on behalf of many clerks when I say this, we'll work with you to help you understand exactly where every dollar is going, because we know the importance of that. We don't want to just ask for $100 million and get a check, and that we will show you exactly where the money is going. But make no mistake, that money will be spent all on ensuring secure elections and ensuring that voters have all the resources they need to get their ballot, return it on time, and have the affirmation that their ballot is tabulated and processed securely.
Thank you. We also have another question from Representative Kolazar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is for Attorney General Nessel. Are there additional resources that the AG's office needs to better assist the Secretary of State with election security?
Yeah, I would say that in terms of the analysts, that proved to be very important to us. And let me say this: combating misinformation and disinformation is just about as important as protecting voters in terms of their ability to cast a vote in person. Because if you are led astray, and we've seen everything from misinformation about the safety or security of registering to vote absentee, to even disinformation about the day of an election, and when that's disseminated across a community, it has the significance of significantly deterring people from voting. Even things like saying your polling precinct has been changed when that's not factually accurate. So I would say that providing additional analysts would probably be a great place to assist us, because we're constantly having to work with our other law enforcement partners to monitor, frankly, social media, which is primarily where this disinformation is spread, so that we can track it and we can ensure that it's pulled down as quickly as possible, so that you don't have more people that are misled and who, as a result, are deterred from voting.
Well, thank you both for those very informative presentations. I'm sure I'll have a lot more questions as we move forward, but a lot of what you talked about is already kind of being worked on, and I know that there's a lot more, so I look forward to working with both of you, as well as everyone on the committee here, and we have a lot of work to do, so thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
So moved. All in favor? Aye. Being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you all.